Well, now you know how the airspeed indicator, vertical speed indicator, and altimeter work. Let's take a look at some possible problems with these pitot-static instruments. First, look at what would happen if the pitot tube became clogged. Well, there's only one instrument connected to the pitot tube, and that happens to be the airspeed indicator. If the pitot tube slowly became clogged, such as with an ice buildup, then your airspeed reading would gradually decrease. Eventually, with complete clogging, your airspeed reading would drop to 0. Of course, this doesn't mean you have no airspeed. It just means that your airspeed indicator isn't showing that airspeed. And we flight instructors like to simulate airspeed failure with our students, so that's why we carry small soap dish holders that have about 50 suction cups on them, and I did this with one of my students. Her name was Betty. I distracted her. She looked outside. I covered the airspeed indicator. She turned back inside and she said, "What did you do that for?" And I said, "Well, I simulated airspeed failure," thinking rather smugly, of course, that I had fooled her. I turned to the side and all of a sudden she reached over, grabbed it, pulled it off, and I looked over at her and I said, "What did you do that for?" She said, "I simulated fixing it." So you've got to be careful when you fly with smart students like Betty. However, in some airplanes, it's possible to have the pitot tube and the drain hole, which is located right about here, clogged simultaneously. This traps air under pressure inside the airspeed indicator. Folks, if this happens, then you're just having a really bad air day. The airspeed indication will stay the same regardless of what your actual airspeed is. So, if the pitot tube becomes clogged, the airspeed indicator is the only instrument that becomes unreliable because it's the only instrument connected to the pitot tube. Now, let's assume that on another day, your static system vent becomes clogged. And considering how much trouble you seem to be having with clogging, maybe it's a good time to get that cholesterol checked. So, which of these instruments do you think would be affected? The airspeed indicator, the vertical speed indicator, or the altimeter? Of course, you know that all three of them are connected to the static system vent. So all three instruments, the airspeed indicator, the vertical speed indicator, and the altimeter would be inoperative or unreliable. Of course, it follows that if both the static vent and the pitot tube became clogged, all three instruments would, again, be unreliable. So that is why during your pre-flight, you check to see that nothing is blocking or clogging the pitot tube and static vent holes. But how does your pitot or static system become clogged in the first place? Well, some pilots actually forget to take off the pitot tube cover before takeoff. Others forget to remove the tape they put over the static vent when they wash the airplane. And that's never happened to me more than once. The most common blockages are caused by dirt and bugs, or dirty bugs. Small insects have been known to use the pitot tube as a nesting spot. Visually inspecting the pitot tube and the static vent is the only way you should check for obstructions. Never, under any circumstance, blow into the pitot tube or static port. You'll easily damage the pitot-static instruments, and you'll peg your airspeed needle at 3 million miles per hour. During certain conditions, in-flight ice can block the pitot-static system entrances. So what do you do on a cold, rainy day when you haven't changed power or started to climb and suddenly you see your airspeed indication dropping? There's a good chance that your pitot tube has iced up. If that happens, switch on the pitot heat. This is like having a hot cattle prod on your wing. The ice should immediately melt away and restore the airspeed indication. And any cattle in the vicinity should head for the hills. I'm just trying to steer you straight here. On the other hand, what if you see all three of the pitot-static instruments acting funny? Well, as a student pilot, the instruments were always acting funny to me, even when they were working properly. But as far as you're concerned, if you see these three instruments acting improperly, you know it can't be a problem with the pitot tube, since that would only affect the airspeed indicator. It has to be a problem with the airplane's static system. Fortunately, your Skyhawk is equipped with an alternate static source. The solution to this problem is to pull the alternate static air control knob. The alternate static source in the Skyhawk uses cabin air as its static air pressure source. This air pressure is a little bit less than normal static air pressure, which may cause a very slight error in your airspeed reading. Fortunately, there's a table in Chapter 5 of your Skyhawk manual that gives you the corrections for your indicated airspeed when using the alternate static source. Notice that the corrections are normally only 1 or 2 knots. Now that you know how the pitot static system instruments work, you'll know which ones are likely to be unreliable if and when you have pitot or static system problems.